Hello and welcome to episode 2 of TMAT Talks. This is the top 10 spellcasters. I'm Rythbryt. I'm here with Centaur.
Ahoy.
And Tiberius is here as well.
Hello.
In the house to talk about one of your favorite things, right? Spellcasters.
Right up there with throwing weapons.
So since this is your favorite thing, I'm going to have Centaur give us an overview of what this category is because we're going to save your voice for later on.
Yes.
Centaur, why don't you give us just a quick overview. As a reminder, before we get to what this category is, this is our look at the top 10 for we have 10 different categories of things. We did the monsters in the previous episode. For good and evil, we're going to take a look at the top 10 spellcasters. We use a very simple criteria. We individually make up a list of what we think are the top 10, in this case, spellcasters, and then we compile the results for each of our individual lists, and we rank them and we give them points. And so your first place gets 10 points all the way down to, second place gets 9, and third place is 8 all the way down to the last person gets 1. And then we add the totals together, and very scientifically, mathematically, we figure out who has the most, and they get the first position all the way down. As we mentioned last time, a lot of sort of user bias here, but we enjoy that. So if you don't like the list, that's fine. You have your own opinion, but this is just our take on what we think are the top 10, in this case, spellcasters. So, Centaur, you want to give us a rundown of what the category is?
Sure. So, spellcaster does not necessarily mean I have the easiest time casting. It does not necessarily mean I do the most damage as a caster. Instead, it more reflects just how useful is this caster. So for some people, when they're building their list, they're looking at how effective are they for the army that they're part of. Some people look at it to say, what unique niches does this fill to meet and hard counter things that I might encounter? For some people, it's just a matter of, does this person have excellent spells, and are their spells better than other people's spells? One of the things that I love about the game is that perhaps not as much as in some of the other games by Games Workshop, but there are a lot of really good casters in this game. And so I know that when I was putting together my list, I found that there were certain people that I'm like, this is a great spellcaster, but they're not going to make my top 10. And I think that's a really good place to be. And so you'll find that some of what's present here, for some people, utility won out. For some people, it's just that, certain spells are better than others, and that put them higher on somebody else's list. And so you are going to get a pretty diverse rating. I don't think it's spoiling too much to say that some of us were very different in how we presented our list purely because of what we valued as an individual user.
Now, this is Tiberius talking, I did a 4-part series on the different kinds of casters recently on our blog, and I'll just say, from my perspective, if you're one of the casters who has unlimited will, right, you have some way of getting extra will during the game, or you get a free will point a turn, which is the most common way to get it. In my mind, this gives you a sustainability and a longevity that makes you a better caster. That being said, there are people who fall into the other categories, combat mages, multi-purpose ones, people with like the Will of Evil, for example, or people who are auric and last for a few turns and then don't do anything, who provide that niche ability, as you mentioned, Centaur, which makes them show up on the list. But you got to be really good at that if you want to show up. Because otherwise, if your opponent can weather you for 2 or 3 turns, then it's over and you're an overcosted warrior at that point and you're not all that worth it anymore. So there's a lot of math and thought that went into all of this, I'm sure. But that kind of made for, I think, what's going to be a really great discussion tonight.
Great. Fantastic. So we will start, as we did last time, with evil. Not with evil, with good, because good is in the books first, and so good must always go first.
Is that how that works?
I guess so.
Okay.
At some point today, we will have a chance to showcase sort of the different criterion that we looked at to differentiate who we thought was better than not. But not at the beginning, because we all agreed on who the number one caster was for the forces of good. It was Gandalf the White. I don't think there's really any surprises there. He got the perfect 30 points. He is the first model that we have talked about that got perfect 30 points because we were divided on monsters last time for both sides. But there he is. Just to give out the full list, for good spellcasters. We've got Gandalf first at 30. Next is Círdan with a 21. So quite a bit of a drop-off, some disagreement on him. Narrowly followed by Radagast the Brown at 20. Gandalf the Grey at 18, taking our number 4 spot. Tie for 5th place with Galadriel and Saruman the White. That's sort of interesting. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Galadriel from Lothlorien.
Correct,
not
right.
Galadriel, Lady of Light from the White Council.
Correct.
They are different.
That's right. This is Galadriel from Lothlorien, the one who can cast and has 6 will points a turn. 6 will points, not 6 will points a turn. 6 will points plus a free will point each turn.
Both actually have that, by the way, but she has the different spell array and stuff.
Yes.
So
In 7th, with 14 points, is Elrond of Rivendell, obviously. 8th is good old Tom Bombadil, Merido. 9th is, he had 10 points. 9th is Goldberry with 7. And then last, 10th, is a 3-way tie between a batch of elves, Celeborn, Gildor, and Thranduil, all getting 3 points. And then sort of an honorable mention, also getting points, is Arwen at the end with 2 points, bringing up the rear. So an interesting collection there. I guess the place to start, as we did last time, is at the very top. Gandalf the White is your consensus number 1, and this is your baby, Tiberius. You couldn't help today posting Gandalf the White.
I really couldn't help it. No.
So go ahead and extol the virtues of Gandalf the White, so Minuteman Kirk can rage for a few minutes.
Absolutely. Okay, so Gandalf the White got huge boosts in the new edition. In previous editions, not only could he, like in the Warbands era, he only showed up in the Fellowship, which meant he was really expensive as a caster, could not lead anybody, and so he was just kind of omitted from everyone's things. Saruman the White was cheaper and stuff. But with the new version, he got that second attack, which, if you look at the combat mages in this list, is unheard of.
And by combat mages, you're talking about Elrond
and Celeborn, and
Thranduil.
you could put the Mouth of Sauron, of course, but he's an evil character, right? I mean, in there. But the guys who are normally like combat-y people, but they happen to have a utility spell or two that can help them do more. Gandalf gets kind of that middle of the way, where he's not limited to the one attack that you see on like Saruman or the Lorien version of Galadriel or Círdan or Radagast without his beloved hedgehog. But that just gives him that extra bit of oomph and that extra bit of power that helps him be effective when he's not casting spells. He's got 3 great neutralizing spells. He's got Immobilize on a 2-up and Command on a 3-up, which is, of course, bread and butter for most kinds of casters, and it's incredibly easy to cast. He's also got, as kind of in addition to that, he's got the ability to look at somebody who's a spirit model and just say, banish you. And while it doesn't do the same thing as Immobilize and Command, it forces that kind of a model to spend will to resist. You target a Shade with that, they cannot reduce fight value for as many turns as they otherwise would. You target a Barrow-wight with that, they can't paralyze as much. It's so powerful, and it works in some ways like an Immobilize, because you can just pop, right? Deal quick damage, maybe even completely remove the model if you channel it. So really, really powerful stuff. Of course, he's got the Sorcerous Blast on a 4-up, which is really, really good. And for additional damage against non-magical units. He's got 3 really great persistent auric spells. You never want to channel all 3 of them, just because you need the might for other stuff. But they could all be channeled. You got Terrifying Aura, make it harder for people to charge you. You've got Blinding Light, protection from archery and illumination in snares where that matters. And you've got Fortify Spirit, which is the glory be-all and why, in my mind, he's at the top of the list. Because not only can he make himself more resilient to enemy casters, but he can make other units in the army more resilient to enemy casters too. Which means if you got to buff Aragorn, or if you got to buff, Faramir, or if you got to buff Mega Boromir, or whoever you're buffing, you can supplement usually the one weakness that those kinds of heroes suffer from, which is magic. Gandalf is an amazing character here. He can cast Strength and Will on himself. I think that's the last one in the set we have to cover. If you can take your free will point and on a 3-up turn it into a normal will point, that's money, And the fact you can do that to other people too is nice as well, but it's particularly good for yourself. So in my mind, pair that incredible profile with Shadowfax, who gives you 2 will points that you can use to resist. And if you get a 6, of course you get those back. Incredibly powerful profile, very difficult to contain, very difficult to deal with.
He definitely got a boost, and as we'll talk about a little bit later when we get to the army list at the end. It's really nice to have a top tier wizard who can lead troops without having to ally anybody, and that's not common. Certainly not for good. It's pretty rare to have somebody like that. In terms of the spells that he has, and of course Gandalf has 9 spells, and all of them are cast on a 4+ or less. How would you, if you had to rank sort of the value of the spells that he casts in terms of what you're most likely to get value out of, what would be some of the go-to spells that you'd focus on for Gandalf?
Obviously, it depends on the opponent you're facing, but your first turn, unless you're starting on the center line and you have to do something else, you want to cast one of the 3 buffs on yourself. If you're facing an Iron Hills Ballista or a Serpent Horde gunline, that Blinding Light is the first thing you cast, because they're probably not going to be within casting range if they have any casters at all. So you don't need the Fortify Spirit up right away, but you want that archery bubble up so that your important characters, if you're running Denethor like I like to do, make sure he doesn't get sniped early in the game. If you're not facing someone who's very archery heavy, or that they have archery that you're not that worried about because they only have a small pocket of it, casting Fortify Spirit is good if you know that the enemy's got a caster. If you've got Sauron or Saruman on the other side of the board, or another Gandalf on the other side of the board, that should be the first thing that you get up, and you get it up on yourself before you get it on anyone else. Put your mask on, then help other people next to you with your masks. If you're not facing casters and you're not facing archery, channel the Terrifying Aura. I mean, unless everyone you're facing is fearless, someone will fail to charge you, and that's a good thing. So, I mean, Gandalf is a great character, but with only 2 attacks, if he doesn't get the charge, he is very easily overwhelmed. So, one of those 3 spells automatically. Once you get going there, if your opponent doesn't have a Ring Wraith, Sorcerous Blast is a really good spell. You can reliably cast it on your free dice and maybe one of your other ones. If you don't want to spend any of your other ones, you can do that too. But, I mean, if your opponent has a Ring Wraith or a Barrow-Wight or a Shade, throw 1 Channeled Banishment. It's cast on a 3. Easily gotten off on your free spell. It'll make them spend will, which kills all 3 of those kinds of units in its own way, even if they resist it. By spending will, it really reduces them. Those are, I think, the big ones. If you don't know what to do, cast Strength and Will on yourself with your free dice. But other than that, those are your go-tos.
Yeah, it is nice. He has a good mix of spells, and the nice thing about him, it's not true of everybody, all of the mages that we have, but Gandalf has a good mix of spells. If you need to go after an enemy model, he's got multiple spells that can do that. And if you don't have any enemy models to go after, he's got other things he can do. There's almost always something useful that he can do, including, of course, that the Fortify Spirit to protect yourself if there's any casters on the board, or replacing depleted will is always helpful as well. So that's Gandalf the White. I mean, not really any surprises there. You have anything you want to add, Centaur?
Not in particular, other than, I'm really excited about the new change, if for no other reason than 2 to 3 attacks on the charge. Makes it so that if for whatever reason the dice game just isn't working for you on 2s through 4s to cast, it's not like you've wasted 220, 240 points.
And I would be remiss, I forgot, he also got the boosted defense set.
I was going to say,
which is huge.
That's a good thing as well.
Absolutely huge.
And very unusual, again, for a sort of a dedicated actual wizard. Defense 7 is really the most that you'll ever see on a caster who's not Sauron or a Ring Wraith. And so the ability to get to that defense 6 is really good. So our 2nd, 3rd, and 4th spots, pretty consistently across the board. 2nd is Círdan, 3rd is Radagast, and 4th is Gandalf the Grey, which is an interesting sort of a mix. Yes and no, I guess. These are obviously, they're still wizards who have, or in Círdan's case, a magic casting elf who have free will a turn. And I imagine that factored into all of our decisions putting these at the top. Círdan is number 2. I had him ranked second. I think, Tiberius, you had him ranked third.
I had him third.
And Centaur had him at seventh. All in the agreement that he's really good. Just to go over his profile really quickly, he's got the two big aura spells, Command, which is cast on a 2+, and that's the one that allows everybody within 6 inches or 12 inches, if you channel it, I think.
Which you never want
to automatically pass your courage tests, and that's great. And that one stays up as long as he doesn't run out of will,
That's
right?
correct.
And then you got Aura of Dismay, which is the same thing, only you cause terror instead of passing terror tests. And the same thing, it goes to a 12-inch bubble. That one you might use if you've got a very large game, but most of the time I feel like you probably want the might point to make that 5+ cast work. You always want that in reserve. I don't know that one is worth channeling either. Both very good spells, though. And then you add to that the Blinding Light, which, again, really good. That probably is the one that you channel.
Just because it turns it from a one-turn pop to a persistent exhaust spell,
Right.
and it stays.
Right, exactly. And always a good thing to have if your enemy's got any sort of shooting, unless you have Legolas in play. I think he's the only one that gets around the fact that you need to get a 6 to hit. There might be somebody else
Unless
that I'm thinking
siege
of.
engines that do volley fire do it, which I don't think.
No. You still you still got to get a 6+, having used lots of siege engines one siege engine that uses volley fire. No, you still need the 6 to hit. Obviously, it's not a natural 6, so you can might into it, but it's a really good thing to have. It really reduces the shooting. And then last is Enchanted Blades, cast on a 4+, which is, I think, probably the most niche of the spells. And depending on what you're doing and who you're facing, you might not cast it as much as you want, because I usually, if you want terror up with Hour of Dismay, my guess is you're going to bite it into your will store at least a little bit.
I think so.
And you don't want to exhaust all your will if you've got Blinding Light up, because then it goes away. But it is nice to have that option. And of course, if you don't need Blinding Light up, it's good to have bonus wounds and rerolls to wound, and eventually +1s to wound if you were to channel it on your big hero.
Well, so the thing is because you get a free will point each turn, and once you've cast Aura of Command, you don't have to cast it again. Once you cast Aura of Dismay, you don't have to cast it again. Once you cast Blinding Light, you don't have to cast it again, assuming you channeled it. You might as well try with your free will point to put Enchanted Blades on somebody. Lords of the West don't really need it as much because they already get 1 reroll. I mean, obviously they could get rerolls on the 2nd, 3rd, or even 4th dice if they're mounted. But I mean, it's useful on other characters too, like generic, like Rivendell captains, for example, right? I mean, who don't get any rerolls, incredibly lethal on the charge, especially if they're charging infantry and they knock them down. Rerolling all fails with lances is absolutely brutal. So it in some ways it's just like, well, I have the will, I might, it's free, I might as well try. A free will not spent is wasted, so.
Right. No, I agree. If you've got the extra will lying around, it's something you'd want to do. That's, of course, assuming... I just feel like you probably cast this one later.
Oh, yes.
And the big one, of course, is Hour of Dismay. If you want to get that up on a 5+ cast, you're going to probably be digging at least 1 dice into your will store, maybe
probably 2.
And again, because it's exhaustion, you want to make sure you can't go down to 0 will. So as long as you're not playing... But as long as you're not playing, magic back and forth with an enemy caster... he's not resistant to magic, so you'd probably be more conservative with that if you got that. But if you got the will lying around, you're not using it for anything, it's a great spell to have. The other thing, of course, to mention about Círdan is he is unarmed, which is an issue if he ever gets into fighting, because you're -1 to your duel roll, -1 to your wound rolls, which are not great, and he is only fight 5, which is weird. He doesn't have Lord of the West either, right? Which is weird because he clearly is, or was, at one point in time. I guess this is retirement version of Círdan.
It's probably him after he's been captured and released and is given Narya over because he doesn't have it in his war gear. So.
Right, no, he clearly doesn't have Narya, but it still feels like, out of respect, he was a Lord of the West. He had one of the rings. He got the ring on his merit, right? So anyways, that's just be aware he's not going to be a powerhouse fighter. He is, however, remarkably cheap.
Yes.
And so, Rivendell list especially, he's great. Allying him in is more difficult with the recent changes to the way allies work, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Let's see, we also had Gandalf the Grey, who came in at number 4. Centaur, you were very high on Gandalf the Grey. You had him ranked number 3, which I believe is above every other wizard who gets free will points innately, other than Gandalf the White. So tell us a little bit about why you rank Gandalf the Grey so highly.
Sure. So a couple reasons. One, because Gandalf the Grey, his selection of spells is very good, right? I mean, he's basically Gandalf the White light, which is excellent. He has the cart option, which I know not everybody really likes, but I run Shire, so I like the cart option.
Cart is great.
4-up chance to deal a strength 2 hit. It's actually not too terrible when you think about it, and there's no rule that says you can't fire that off if you get charged. So it's kind of a nice little thing to throw in there. He's one of the few heroes of valor on this list that can lead 15 warriors without sinking a large amount of points into, because you can take him as part of a Shire list, which is really nice. He's a nice all-around character, a chance to be strength 5 if he really wants to be in close combat. So I rather like him, and I think the strength and will in particular was the big one I enjoy, because if you need extra will points on your guys, he's one of the few guys who can actually get it back for you. While I do like the spell selection, I just found the selection of spells he had to be better than the other characters.
He does have a surprising number of spells. I think I initially had him ranked at 7, and I just sort of kept creeping him up the more that I looked at him. I have him ranked at 5, and I'm looking now. I've got him below. I forget who I've got him below.
You got him below Radagast,
Radagast,
Saruman
and Círdan. I think I would probably keep him that way. But I'm just looking at the assortment of spells that he has. So he's got your Blinding Light at 2+, which is already making me rethink having Radagast ahead of him, just because Radagast doesn't have anything like that. He's got your command, your mobilize, and your command. Now those are the 3 and 4+ to cast, so it's not great, but it's pretty good. He's got the Terrifying Aura, Protection of the Valar, which is really good, like arguably better than Fortify Spirit. It's harder to cast, but it's complete immunity. Nobody has to roll anything for a whole turn. If you cast that on yourself and you're fighting a wizard, you're going to be in great shape. And if you are, if you got somebody else who's low on will, like a Boromir in the Fellowship, it's great for making sure you can't compel him places where he doesn't want to go. As long as Gandalf can survive the compel, which he did not in the game that I played against Saruman.
Now, that being said, I played a game where I used the Riders in Black, Ring Wraiths, fighting my son who wanted to try out the Fellowship. And that one spell, Protection of the Valar, ruined my day, because he had Gimli and Boromir and Aragorn and Gandalf, and that was it. And with the exception of Gandalf, none of the other 3 are very good at fighting off a prolonged assault from Ring Wraiths. And he would just pop that annoying little spell and march as a little ball across the field. And here are my Ring Wraiths ready to fight. And we literally cannot cast magic to wear them out before they get there. And it was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. Got absolutely roasted. But it's one of those spells that until you face it, you don't really realize how powerful it can be. So there's that.
Yeah. He's got good war gear options. So, those are the big 5, and then you've also got Strength and Will, and then those sort of niche Collapse Rocks, and then Sorcerer's Blast, which on a 5+, I don't know how much you do that.
It's really hard to do.
But,
really hard to get on.
If you're at the end of the game, and you got a free will point, and the enemy is out of will, You'd rather have the option, I guess, than nothing,
Well, and the thing also to think about is because of the list that Gandalf is part of, I actually tend to cast Sorcerer's Blast almost every turn when I run Gandalf. Once I get my odds up, I throw it down. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, that's fine. We can deal with it. If it does work, in all the lists that he's part of, knocking people over, even if you don't damage with the spell, knocking them over to set up for the rest of your charges is huge. In a Shire list, for example, I cannot tell you how nice it is to be like, I'm not getting wounded this turn. So I can Piercing Strike with a bunch of Hobbit militia with axes, and I don't care, because Gandalf knocks somebody over, or Gimli can afford to two-hand his axe and only go for 2 attacks because I'm not getting wounded this turn. So, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot there, too, that's just because of the types of armies that you run him with.
Right. Good. Rounding out our top 4 is Radagast, and Tiberius is chomping at the bit to explain why Radagast is, in fact, better than Gandalf the Grey. So go ahead.
Well, so Radagast has one advantage over Gandalf the Grey that I think cannot be overstated, and so I will say it now. Most of his spells are cast on a 3-up or a 2-up, which means that with just his free will point, he can reliably cast almost everything he has to do. Now, which ones does that not apply to? It doesn't apply to, of course, the Aura of Dismay, which on a character who's twice as much as Círdan, it makes sense to go with Círdan instead. But honestly, with the breadth of things that he's able to do, I think it's fine to go with Radagast in place of Círdan. And I've done that before. Allying him into Rivendell and stuff is a lot of fun. The Aura of Dismay is, of course, really powerful, too, because Radagast himself, 1, can cast spells on people he can't see, and 2, has the Stalk Unseen. So if you put him behind a really fat rock, he can still provide the auric buffs to those people on the other side of the rock to make them cause terror. He can cast magic against the people who are charging the people on the other side of that big fat rock, even if he can't see them. And they can't do anything to him in return, which is something Gandalf cannot do. Gandalf has to be visible. He has to be in line of sight, which makes him more of a target to enemy casters, even though he could pop Protection of the Valar, which basically is like saying, well, I'm not going to cast anything on you, but you can't cast anything on me. So there's that. The other thing about Gandalf the Grey is, while Gandalf has really good spells that are very precise in their targets, Radagast has really good auric spells. Nature's Wrath is the other one that's not cast on a 3-up. Yes, the range got nerfed, but you can channel this thing if you need to do damage with it. But it's just fine if you put everybody who just charged your Elven battle line, let's just assume he's allied with Rivendell here for a minute, you can knock them all down to the ground. And now all of those elves can go two-handed because, again, as was just mentioned, their opponents are on the ground. It doesn't matter, right? So it's perfectly okay for them to do that. Then you get into his cheaper spells, the ones that he can reliably get off on his free dice. You got Panic Steed on a 2-up. Channel that thing, it becomes an area of effect. Knock all the riders off their horses. You're facing Rivendell Knights, or even worse, you're facing the riders of Theoden, right? And you target someone, right, who's in the middle of that battle line who has a single will point. Lots of Rohan heroes have that. Target Darwin and all the guys around him. Send them packing, right? All flopping. If they don't beat you on the high dice, throw 2 dice at it if you want to make sure you get a high one off. You just go crazy bonkers with it.
And I do want to clarify, just so it's clear. So the range of Panic Steed is 12 inches. So the 3 inches when you channel it is off of whatever you're targeting. It's not 3 inches within wherever Radagast is. Mm-hmm. It's 3 inches of whatever target you've selected that's up to 12 inches away. So this is like Pikachu calling down lightning, on the other side of the board sort of a thing, and just flattens everybody. On top of the Nature's Wrath, of course, which is based off of you. So you've got lots of options to throw riders. It's not an automatic knock prone. It's not a one on the thrown rider test necessarily, but it's you can get to pockets of guys even if they're staying away from you somewhere where a Nature's Wrath wouldn't hit. You can still reach out and hit them, which is a sort of a nasty surprise for cavalry armies that really rely on having their horses. It's really good way to sort of nuke them without them knowing. The only sort of alternative to it, apart from resisting the spell, is, and that's not hard, you just cast it on somebody who it's a target. You pick somebody with no will, who's within 12 inches away, who's within 3 inches of a hero, and if you channel the thing, as long as you roll a 2, you're going to get it off, and there's nothing that anybody can do about it. Because they're not the target. I'm pretty sure that even if you got an area of effect thing, if it affects everybody within 3 inches of the target is the one who's still got a test. I don't think a hero would get a chance to resist if they happen to be affected by the spell because they're not the target. I could be wrong about that.
That's a good question.
Yeah, so the funny thing is that the similar spells like Nature's Wrath and Wrath of Bruin and specify that one model resists, right, on behalf of everybody that's affected.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So the wording is sort of weird. It says that, so this is the channel version. We're on page 99 of the rule book. It says this power also affects all, and it also targets, sorry. Let me get them, back up. Let me get the wording correct. Channeled, this power, Panic Steed, also targets all enemy models within 3 inches of the initial target. I thought it was effect, so
So that actually triggers page 95, where it says that when you have a magical power that targets multiple models, the person who's being affected chooses one of the models within range to resist.
So that is an issue. You could shoehorn in the will to resist. So that's good to know.
But at the same time, something to think about, and I say this having been a cavalry running person on the business end of Radagast by Tiberius before. There are actually not a lot of cavalry models that have a high will store. There really aren't. Like King Alessar, obviously, Gandalf the White on Shadowfax, Gandalf the Grey on any mount, but really there aren't very many.
Right. I mean, apart from the Nazgul, obviously.
Yeah.
The mounted Nazgul and your Saruman and your Gandalf.
Basically, anybody who's on our list tonight.
The other ones, the big ones, all have 3 will or less.
Right.
And you have an awful lot of very important cavalry heroes who have one will, right?
Yeah.
Or 2. I guess Theoden got a bump.
Yeah, Theoden got
so
a nice
he's up to 3 now.
Theodred is also pretty good.
That's
right.
I mean, but literally, obviously the vast majority of captains, the vast majority of just heavy knights, but beyond that, if you're not a Valor or Legend hero, 1 or 2?
Well, and here's the thing, too, right? Because, remember, this is a 2+ to cast.
Right.
And you've got free will every turn unless you take the Great Eagle upgrade. So even if they've got 3 will, you can cast this thing, like you mentioned, behind a rock because you've got the sight bonus that you get from the bird friends that Radagast has. You just keep casting this thing. Eventually, I mean, you only need a 2 to hit it. If you get the 2, they have to resist. They have to spend will unless you're resistant to magic. And so, it's a great way, you're getting value out of that free will point. Eventually, they're going to succumb. They're going to run out of will to do it unless you got somebody like a Gandalf who can strengthen their will as they're going along. Most armies don't even have that. So again, it's a sneaky, against some it's a very niche thing. If you got sort of basic infantry models in your army, you're not going to use it very much. But against a cavalry army, it's a very dangerous hard counter. And even if you've got a model that happens to have will, if you get that 5 or a 6, there's no guarantee that they're going to get a 5 or a 6, even if they throw 2 or 3 will, in which case now they got to throw might. And of course, if you're a cavalry army, you really want your might. You need your might. So if you're throwing it on other stuff just to keep yourselves on your horses, that's only a win for whatever force you've included Radagast in. So, all right. Well, you convinced me that I was right. I had him at 4 above Gandalf the Grey. I think I'm comfortable with that.
2 final points though, because Radagast has 2 other really great spells. First off, he keeps the immobilize on a 3-up that Gandalf the White, Gandalf the Grey has. But again, you don't have to see the person you're targeting. Easily cast on your free dice. But he can also renew, which means if you're pairing him with really powerful heroes, Gil-galad, Glorfindel, Elrond, just from the Rivendell side of things, or even the twins, right? If they're getting pushed back, if they're taking some damage, he can just say, okay, feel better. Okay, feel better. Okay, feel better. And then he's not working the defense side of neutralizing enemy casters anymore, but he's doing the augment side of it too. And that's very rare in a caster that has unlimited will, to be able to enhance the models with wounds. There are some people, like Gandalf, who can restore will, but to restore wounds back is huge. Really, really powerful move. So.
Centaur, you had something you wanted to say as well.
All I'm going to throw
You're going to go back to
is,
Gandalf the Grey?
I'm going to go back to Gandalf the Grey just for a very
Who, by the way,
shot.
it's worth noting, so Gandalf the Grey is available in 3 different lists, right?
He's available in 6.
There's a lot of lists, that's
because
right.
He's in the
an awful lot
Fellowship,
of
he's in the
lists.
Thorns Company, he's in the White Council for the all-hero armies.
Right.
But he's also in the Shire, and there's Survivors of Lake Town.
Right.
And I'm fairly certain there's... so I'm thinking of Gandalf the White in Minas Tirith as well.
So 5
Gandalf is
different
distributed
lists
across
you have Gandalf
6
the
different
Grey,
lists, 5 with Gandalf the Grey.
And 2, he can lead an awful lot of troops.
An awful lot. Who are cheap.
Who are cheap troop troops? Yeah,
Very
Lake
cheap
Town
troops.
survivors of Lake Town, very cheap. Hobbits, of course, obviously very cheap. Is that what you were going to say?
More or less. The other thing I was going to mention is, on the point of cavalry not having a lot of will points, Gandalf the Grey is one of the few ways to get extra will points back on your cavalry guys, and that's all I have to say about that.
Right. Yes. No, that's true. If you got Gandalf the Grey against Radagast, you're going to have a fun. Well, they will have fun. I don't know that their armies will have fun, but they will have fun. Playing around with each other. The last thing about Radagast that's interesting, of course, is if you take him on the sleigh, he is one of those very rare heroes who can now have 5 attacks on the charge.
With Fleetfoot.
With Fleetfoot, right, on the sleigh, yes.
And a
Now,
decent fight value.
he doesn't have monstrous charge, so, the sleigh is not going to knock horses over, but it's a mount, so I assume you get the cavalry bonus.
so.
You get
As far as
the
I can
+1 on
tell.
your
Yep.
charge, and of course, if you got Sebastian, then you got 6.
Yeah.
Attacks, 5 from you that you can might, and then 1 bonus one that is just sort of what it is, but very annoying when it goes off.
And when it gets to 6.
Yes. The other war gear option that we should talk about, is there a situation where you would take the Great Eagle mount, which you have to trade your staff
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. The iconic moment you would take is if you're flying him with a squadron of eagles. But the thing is that if you're using eagles, you don't need to cast Aura of Dismay. You don't have to cast Terrifying Aura, because everyone in your army is already causing terror. You do want to be able to cast Renew, because your guys are going to lose will points. Well, they're going to lose wounds. And if you can only do that 6 times, that's bad. I'd rather that he'd either be following along in a sleigh, which is cheaper, by the way, or walking it on foot even, right? And just popping around and being like, oh, you need help? Well, here, let me move 6 inches, let me cast 12 inches, and give you your wound back every single turn if required. So in my mind, I don't see a good case for taking the Eagle. I'd like to, but I don't see a good case for it. I think the sleigh is just better as a mount.
I think I'm in the same boat. I was just curious. I guess the argument for the Great Eagle would be, fly on a monster is pretty good, but even if you're charging since it's Radagast, I guess you get the bonus attacks, right? Because you use the Eagle as a mount, so you get 2 attack space plus 1 on the charge.
I'm pretty sure you can use the Great Eagle's attacks.
Right, well that's what I'm saying. But you're still only getting 3 attacks.
Yeah.
It's at a higher strength because it's a Great Eagle, and you got the bonus from Radagast Alliance, so it's still plus 1 on the charge, assuming you don't ally into something that's yellow, I guess. But I don't know. I guess that would be the argument. And you get slightly more mobility because 12 inches plus fly is slightly better than 10 inches with woodland, with Fleetfoot. But I don't know that it's enough of a difference. I'm not convinced it's enough of a difference to give up the free will a turn from the staff, which is you're hard capped. That's the thing with all of these mages that we'll get to in a minute, who don't have infinite will. Once you run out of your will, you're not a caster anymore. You are whatever your profile is. Radagast on a Great Eagle is still pretty good profile, but I don't think it's as good of a profile as the sleigh with the free will points every turn. That's just sort of my take on it.
That's mostly true. To make a very short argument, because I don't think we need to talk extensively about it, I hadn't really thought about the Great Eagle because I hadn't really thought about running Radagast. The ability to headhunt with your Panic Steed at a 12-inch move with a 12-inch range while not needing to, while still being blocked by stuff is still incredibly good. And the ability
Without
to
a
actually
doubt.
close with stuff with a monstrous charge Great Eagle is also not bad. Yes, you're only going to get it off maybe 4 or 5 times, because I don't know, you'd go and get rid of your entire 6 will points with Radagast. I don't know, I still feel like there's at least something there. I wouldn't run it, but then again, I'm not a person who likes running Great Eagles or Radagast, so
The chariot.
that's just me.
Well, the sleigh doesn't have any weird chariot maneuvering rules on
No.
it, right? You can just about face the thing.
Yeah, it's a mount. It's a mount.
Perfect.
So far as I know, you don't have to worry about, moving X number of inches in one spot and then turning it and all that stuff.
Take the sleigh.
There you go. Well, you know what we think. If you feel differently, comment after you like or subscribe and let us know what you think. All right, so that takes us through the 4. Goodness gracious, we've covered a lot here. Let's keep moving right along. So we've got a tie for 5th between Galadriel, this is the Lothlorien Galadriel, and Saruman the White from the White Council list. I have a feeling this to me this feels like one of these things does not belong with the other. But let's talk about Saruman first. I had Saruman ranked number 3. Tiberius, you had Saruman ranked number 2. Centaur, you did not have Saruman the White ranked.
Sure didn't.
Care to elaborate?
Sure. So a couple thoughts. First of all, I want to just state up front, free will point per turn. All of his spells are cast on 2s through 4s. Great spell selection. There's no doubt about it. And reroll.
I'm not convinced of this.
I'm going to say all of this up front. That is an excellent profile. If you look at who Saruman the White can ally with, though, there's a reason why you don't see him very often in play, either for casual games or for tournament play. And the simple reason is he's a very limited, very niche character in a very niche list. The White Council is comprised of an awful lot of very useful characters. And there's a reason why you see Galadriel in a bunch of different lists, albeit this is a different Galadriel, right? But, there's a reason why a person who's at the same ranking as him would be present in a lot of lists. There's a reason why Elrond would be present in a lot of lists. There's a reason why Gandalf, why Celeborn is present in an awful lot of lists. But you don't really see Saruman ever being brought over, allied in, or anything else. And the simple reason is he has really good synergy with the White Council. What he doesn't have is wide applicability that's competitive in tournament play. And so, again, going back to how useful a character actually is, I just don't see him as being as useful as some of the other people on this list, and I was one of the people who put Arwen at number 10. Because even in Arwen's case, she's a cheap, useful caster who does a specific role. And Saruman's great, but I don't see you actually using him. He seems like a wasted profile. And this is more on GW's side of things. They should have put him available in some other sort of list or made him more useful for allying in with other groups. But literally his only real synergy is with White Council people.
Well, I think that may be too harsh. I mean, I haven't run Saruman the White, but I've looked at plenty of lists that
I've run him
pre-era that allied him a lot with Rohan.
Yeah.
Because Rohan really wants some sort of anti-wizard to deal with anti-casting. And I'm sure he is convenient allies with everything and
so good? The White Council is convenient allies with everyone except Arnor and Numenor.
Okay, all right. So
and then historical allies with Rivendell, but they're convenient with basically everybody else.
Right, that makes sense. So I was more convinced until you brought up Arwen, and then I think the argument goes apart. But this is something that will be this will be a theme throughout. Is that in a vacuum, there's different ways to evaluate these profiles, right? You can look at them in a vacuum. In a vacuum, Saruman, excellent profile. Not all the excellent profiles are easy to use in army lists, right? And if you're going for something if you're going for a hero army list, then that's one thing. But if you're trying to incorporate Saruman, the thing about Saruman the White is that he is very much a one-drop in the army, and you're paying essentially that hero tax to get a hero and a warband without the benefit of the warband that comes in. So I can see that. I still think he's a really, really, really good caster, and I have him at 3, but that is a thing,
To explain why I put him at 2, Saruman the White, when it comes to casting, in many ways is better than anyone else in the list. All right, 18-inch immobilizing commands on a 2 and a 3 with a reroll. You will almost never fail to cast either of those spells. And that's really, really good. Aura of Command. If you only have one Auric spell, this means you can drop him into an army list that does not have good courage and has no way to compensate for it, right? So, if you're... The ideal case, of course, would be to drop him in an Arnor list, except that they're impossible allies, right? But if you ignore that for a second, right, you can use Saruman the White to supplement low Hobbit courage. You can use it to supplement, kind of Minas Tirith courage, because they'll be convenient allies. They wouldn't get the army bonus, right? And this allows him to just be he just has to be present. And he is already doing so much to help your team that I think it's actually worth a kind of a revisit, second look at him. And the reason I had him at number 2 is because if you've never fought an 18-inch re-rolling 2s or failed 2s or 3s on Immobilizer command, and you are running monsters on your end, I mean, he can literally take 1 or 2 monsters out of the game for the entire game. And that's really powerful.
Right. Well, it's the same thing that we talked about with the Panic Steed with Radagast, right? Is that if you got a free will point every turn, even if your opponent has lots of will, like a 2 or 3 will store, you just cast a 2 dice Immobilize, or even worse, not a 2 dice, a 1 die Immobilize or a Compel at a 2+ or a 3+. If you're re-rolling failures, what the odds of you failing that are pretty low, right?
So you have an 89% chance of success, 0.89 probability of casting the command successfully,
which is the 3+,
which
right?
is the 3+.
Yeah.
And you have a 97.5% chance, of casting the Immobilize successfully on a 2-up.
Right, so the point is that you cast that thing.
You cast it, it works.
If it goes off, the enemy has to do something with it. They can't just sit there and be like, oh, well, great, I'm going to let you compel me. I mean, they could, but that's not a recipe for winning games because your hero can't do anything, and they can't call heroic actions in future phases if they've been transfixed or compelled. If you compel, I mean, goodness gracious, you can move them. If they're on horses, it's even worse. You can push them out of position. You have to do something about it. And so that means they're spending their will really early so that when you get to the end game, you've got even more tricks up your sleeve. So he's really good. Just to clarify, in fairness, we put you on the spot a little bit with your Saruman on the evil, on the good side. But just in fairness, spoiler alert, you have Saruman ranked very, very high on the evil list, and it's essentially the same profile. My guess is that that's because he is tailor-made to slot in and bring a lot of the troops, the things that you were talking
he's
about.
very useful in an Isengard list,
Right.
and I would argue almost essential if you're not planning on running a Legendary Legion or you don't want a lot of siege equipment.
Which is to say, again, it's not the profile; it's the
exactly.
army
It's more
fit
utility.
that you graded it on. Which I think it's not how we graded it, obviously, but that's a consideration, and it's a fair one. So
one last point before we leave this.
All right.
I will note, before the new rules release, Saruman the White was a constant drop in Minas Tirith armies by Mick from the Vini Vidi Viki blog, and that was a competitive choice. To just throw, at that point he was 150 points. You just throw him into an army. This was Legion-style era, so you could throw him in with one other Minas Tirith person and boatloads of Minas Tirith guys, and it was incredibly powerful. After that time, it's true, he has kind of tapered off, but there's a lot of people who still like throwing him into things more for fun than I think for competitive play. So if you see him on the table, sadness, but most of the time you probably won't see him on the table.
yeah. Well, and the other thing too, right, is you see him in Minas Tirith. I mean, you would never do that now. Usually not, because Minas Tirith you might, because Minas Tirith's army bonus is kind of meh. But
wanted.
For Rohan, you would almost never see him
ever.
allied in.
Yeah.
And of course, a lot of people, Rohan, you run the Legendary Legions, which of course prevents that now. So a lot, his game state has changed. I still think there are plenty of civs that would enjoy having him. He's better than, he's cheaper than Gandalf the White. I think he's clearly better as an ally for most lists than Gandalf the Grey. But, everybody his own. That's the joy of playing in a game that's open. Galadriel is the other one. We'll talk just sort of briefly about her. We've hit the basic spells. I mean, she's got your Blinding Light, your Immobilize, your Compel. Everything is a forecaster below, which is pretty good. You got Blessing of the Valar, which is the Fate Point restoration one, right? Which you can do in addition to the mirror, which can also replenish fate points, which is pretty cool. She gets the free will point every turn. Unlike everybody else that we've talked about, except for Círdan, her free will point, like Círdan's, you can't actually prevent her from ever getting it because there's nothing to shatter or destroy, which is a nice bonus. But like Círdan, she is also unarmed. So not a great combat model. She is fight 6, but with just the one attack and the -1 to a dual penalty, dual roll, and the -1 to a rune rolls. Difficult for her to kill things. You can do it, the best way is to immobilize or transfix whatever it is that you
Then
want to
trap
fight, and then trap it, and then have her roll double dice. And if you play like that with Contest of Champions, you can actually squeeze some kills out of her. But, primarily supporting character, you probably rather have Celeborn being your leader for Contest of Champions, but no luck, you don't get to do that. So, Galadriel is your lady. You want to say a couple of words about Galadriel. And what I really want to know, though, is why did you choose this Galadriel? Because this is the one that you have ranked.
This is the one that I have ranked, and not
you don't have the other one ranked, the Uber attack one from the White Council. So go ahead, you can say a word or two about Galadriel.
So the costs are the same. It ultimately came down to what Centaur just iterated. Galadriel, Lady of Light, is a fantastic character. More on her later. She is phenomenally good. She's a much better combatant. But this Galadriel can lead 18 warriors in a Lorien list. She also can regrow lost fate points on captains, right? Like Haldir and Rumil are great heroes until they suffer that first wound, and then they become incredibly fragile. To be able to regrow without having to channel Blessing of the Valar, to just cast it and regrow those lost fate points is really, really powerful, especially if they're getting shot at with enemy archery.
Right, and that's a 3+ cast with no cast. Resistance or anything.
Absolutely
it's just you rolled a 3 and you got the fate point.
It works and it works. She's also one of the few heroes in the game who can cast Heroic Resolve and not be penalized by the standing still requirement. Most of the people who cast Heroic Resolve would rather be charging. You think of the Witch King, you think of Eowyn, and it's like, I don't really want to be standing still this turn, but they have a caster that I want to protect this other hero from, so I'm going to pop Heroic Resolve. She's like, great. Let me kick back and relax while I pop Heroic Resolve and keep you all happy. Go do my bidding, you wonderful Galadriel, you. So she's a fantastic hero. I love her dearly, always have. There's that. I don't take her mirror as much as I probably should. Mostly because most people in the army don't benefit from it, except for herself, maybe Celeborn. But she's a fantastic hero to have.
So that takes us to the end of the infinite will built into their profiles. There's, of course, one other infinite will character that we should talk about, and that's Elrond, who came in at number 7 with 14 points. Tiberius and I had him ranked fairly low. We had him at 8 and 9, respectively. Centaur, you had him quite a bit higher than that.
Oh, yes. He's number 2 on my list, between the 2 Gandalf profiles.
All right. So I want to give you an opportunity to explain that, because I imagine there are some reviewers. Now, I think a lot of people pre the nerfs to Nature's Wrath would probably be inclined to agree with you that he was a top-tier devastating caster, especially if you were to pair him with Lindir, who I'm sure you will talk about.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm sure that post-nerf there are some people who are sort of wondering, it seems a little high, especially over Saruman the White.
Okay, so first of all, I just want to note that I spent literally the entirety of my commute coming home today practicing my defense for this guy, because I just knew this was going to come up. All right, so for starters, I want to say that as a caster, if we were looking for the punchiest, most dangerous caster, Elrond would not be at the top of the list. He would not be number 2 for me for sure. But
he'd be very close to the top, though.
He would be pretty good, as he does do an awful lot.
And when you talk about punchiest, are you referring to combat prowess, or what do you think?
I'm
what are you talking
more
about?
referring to he doesn't have the most dangerous spells per se out of the list, right? Saruman the White definitely has more dangerous spells for reasons that we've already talked about. He doesn't get the free will point automatically on his own. So with that in mind, if you're looking for I want a guy who shoots magic at people, then he's not your person. I find him to be an extremely effective caster for a couple of reasons. First of all, because taking him and Lindir in the same list, and as long as he's within 6 inches of Lindir, he gets a free will point. Even if he's already out, he can still use it. That is basically the same as a wizard, more or less, and it's immune to your staff is broken, which is excellent. More than that, he's a very multi-purpose caster. He can do area damage, very good area damage with Wrath of Bruinen, albeit perhaps not as far. And he also has Renew on a 3+, and he's one of only a few characters, Radagast is the only other one coming to mind for me at least, that even has Renew. the ability to be able to put wounds back on a person. But more than that, unlike people like Radagast, you could use your might to channel these spells if you really wanted to. It's fine, because with Lord of the West giving you re-rolling a dice on to hit to win the duel roll, re-rolling a dice to try to win the duel to wound roll, and having an elven made hand and a half sword at fight 6 with 3, maybe 4 attacks if you're charging on a horse. This guy is extremely hard to take down. He's also extremely defensible at defense 7 with the heavy armor upgrade. I mean, this guy is ridiculously difficult to deal with, which is something you don't have for literally any of the other casters we've seen so far. He is extremely defensible, and on top of that, 3 rerollable fate points. 3 rerollable fate points. And Hero of Legend, you can ally him with anybody if you really, really want to. You can ally him with a bunch of the other elves in order to make him even better, right? If you can have Galadriel making it so that you get, your fate points back. This guy's a tank, right? So I find this guy to be an extremely useful caster because he does damaging spells. He can do them every single turn. He can restore and do supportive magic on people. And he won't die on you, which is my biggest concern about some of the other casters on this list. They're very fragile.
I don't disagree with anything that you said. I guess my question is, so this ranking that you have him ranked second. How much of that second is Elrond with Lindir? And does his ranking change if you don't have Lindir?
He drops 1, maybe 2 points. Honestly, my top 5 are Gandalf the White, Elrond, Gandalf the Grey, Galadriel, and Radagast. He maybe drops below Gandalf the Grey, but even then, I don't know. I've killed Gandalf so many times. I feel like the defense 5 on Gandalf the Grey is extremely fragile.
Okay.
And more so the defense 3 on Galadriel.
Exactly, and the defense, 5 on Radagast?
5 on Radagast.
Yes, he can hide, but eventually you can't, especially if you're up against non-mounted, 8-inch move Uruk-hai or something like that. There are a lot of ways to get to Radagast. I feel a lot more comfortable on the table playing with Elrond, and I feel much better about using an area-based caster when I know I can wade into the enemy and not worry about it.
As a person who has run the triple Wrath of Bruinen list, against Centaur, actually, where I ran Elrond, Arwen, and Radagast the Brown channeling Nature's Wrath.
Well, that was not kind.
That was very
painful.
not kind, and I took it all back, and I felt horrible at the end of the day. But to say this, even with the nerf, if Elrond casts Wrath of Bruinen right before charging, so you're millimeters away from 2 models in a front line, his even reduced area is a 7.5 inch, roughly, if he's on a horse, 7.5 inch diameter hit. So you can take out 8 models, 2 ranks deep, and put them all on the ground before you finish charging. Oh, and they're all taking strength 2, maybe strength 3 hits if you channel it. I don't think you need to. Most of the time, strength 2 hits will be just fine. Exceptions if you're charging a D7 dwarf line, I guess. But even then, you're knocking them on the ground. So there's still a lasting, persistent benefit to not channeling it. So even with the reduced penalty, I think it's still a great spell. I think it is a top tier spell. For me personally, I'm looking at the people that I have here, and almost all of the other ones have free will. Elrond can conditionally have free will, but at that point, he costs as much as Gandalf the White. And so, yes, you've got 30 slots of warriors you can include with these guys, so you can be done after that. But it's just a lot. It's a lot of points.
Well, he costs as much as Gandalf the White if you don't have any upgrades on Elrond, and if Lindir doesn't have any upgrades, which Lindir is, you almost always, I don't know that there's any situation where you wouldn't take the armor
no, you always take the heavy
on both of them. So by the time you do that, Lindir fully decked out is
75
you're pushing 300 points. You're not quite there, but you're getting close to that area. Now, you can lead a lot of Rivendell troops. You've got 30 models you could flesh
30.
out. So 300 points for the ability to lead 30 models is for elves it's pretty good, but it's not a cheap combination. And of course, if the combo is 30 points, it certainly should be a top tier combination. Did you talk about the foresight points?
I have not mentioned
because
that yet, no.
I think that's an underrated part of because the thing about Magic. And this is I always forget about this until I'm playing with a wizard, not against a wizard, because I have trouble doing this myself against people who know how to play wizards. But when I'm playing a wizard, I always forget that if my wizard is charged, I cannot cast anything. And so the foresight points are sort of an underrated way, on top of, the other stuff that you can get in a Rivendell list, like Aura of Dismay from Círdan and things like that. The foresight point's a way to manipulate when you get to go first, or in the case of Nature's Wrath, when you get to go second.
Yeah.
Because you want to go second if you're casting that, because if you go first and you cast it, everybody you don't tag is going to stand up. And so you really want to cast it on a turn where you go second if you can't get the spear supports in the back. So the ability to manipulate priority is quite good, and a part of that as well. So while we're talking about Elrond, we might as well talk about the other individual elves, because it turns out there are a lot of elves that can cast magic. These are pretty low on our list. Elrond came in at number 7 with a hefty 14 points. We've got Gildor, Celeborn, and Thranduil, who are additional elves in a similar spot as Elrond without Lindir, in that they don't have infinite will. But let's talk just a minute about those and why, how we'd sort of rank them relative to each other. You had, let's see, we've got Gildor is on your list, right, Centaur?
Yeah, so Gildor and Glorian is one of those heroes most people tend to forget about, because he's only in the Rivendell list, and he's kind of a weird guy in the Rivendell list because he's not heavily armored.
And his model hasn't been available for like 10 years.
Yeah, so nobody owns him pretty much. So he's kind of a unique character. I really like him, though, because he is a very cheap way to get a 3-up Immobilize out in the game 4 times.
On a fast model.
On a really fast 8-inch moving model with Woodland Creature, and he can take a bunch of other relatively lightly armored, sure, but other Noldorin exiles with him for dirt cheap as well. So if you want to kind of flesh out and slightly increase the number of models that you have in a Rivendell army, a 70-point hero of Fortitude who can lead a bunch of people who are under 10 points can get you a whole lot of numbers really, really fast. The bigger thing with him, though, is that since he has that Immobilize option, if you need to just neutralize a heavy hero so that, Círdan doesn't get ganged up on or something like that, he can hold somebody down for an extended period of time. If you're worried about a Shagrat coming and making a mess of your line, just mobilize him, right? And it's on a 3-up. So, you're probably going to get it off almost every time with a single dice. And if you really need to, you do technically have a might point. So...
Now, I can hear the voice of Tiberius in my head, because he said this to me when I was writing my write-up on Rivendell recently. So those Wood Elves are not actually cheap, especially once you give them the movement buff, which I think you would always do if you're taking...
You're required to.
You have to, so there you go. So they're a base of, 9 points?
9 points
If you
base.
give them the throwing weapons or the bows, they're 11. So they're not remarkably cheap, but... You are getting a warband of 12, and he's a cheap leader for what you're getting. He's fight 6, right?
He's fight
he's
6.
So, his defense is not great, but his fight 6 is pretty good, and he's got elven-made weapons, right?
Yep.
He can't strike.
Elven-made normal sword.
You can't strike, but anytime you're fighting with an elven-made weapon at fight 6, you got a pretty good chance against most things.
Yeah, he has one of the best, one of the broadest arrays of heroic actions you can call, and it's unfortunate because he only has 1 might point. Because he can channel, obviously. He's got Resolve, which I don't think you'd ever cast unless you needed to.
Right. As a fallback option, you always rather have somebody who could resolve if you
But he
needed
can
to.
march, which is huge. Tack on to that 8-inch move. It would be better if he had 2 might points, but he only has 1. And then he's got defense. So if you don't need to get somewhere fast, and you don't need to protect from magic, but you are charged by something big, or you need to charge something big, you just pop the heroic defense, and for 1 turn, make someone stay horrible. Someone who's probably winning you on 3s or 4s goes to winning you on natural 6s. Right, it is a huge change, and you don't see that on a lot of the Rivendell heroes.
Yeah, although I will say, and this is worth mentioning, a fair number of these casters do have access to heroic defense. Radagast has it, so does Galadriel have it as well.
Elrond has it too.
Elrond too. Yep, Elrond as well.
That's
and Celeborn.
That's why he's number 2.
Celeborn's got it also, who we'll talk about in just a minute. So a decent amount of Celeborn doesn't really need it. Neither does Elrond most of the time, but good option to have them available. You always like having the option to heroic defense. It is one of the strongest heroic actions in the game. So always better to have the option than to not, is my view on that. Speaking of guys who have it, Celeborn made the list for me. I had him ranked number 8, which I believe is above Elrond. Yes, it is above Elrond. So let me just take a moment to explain that. Because I can hear people saying, what? Celeborn? So there are probably some people listening who are like, what? Celeborn is a caster? Why, yes, he is. And in fact, he's actually a pretty good one. If you take a look at the spells that he's got, I was taking a look at the spells that, just sort of ranking them in my head. And he's got a couple of very, very good spells. Aura of Command, I think, is an underrated spell. It's a 2+ cast, and it's basically Fury for good. Now, I know elves have really high courage, and in fact, if you take Celeborn, you can actually get your elves up to courage 6 if you give them bonus, which, by the way, is pretty cool, which is courage 7 with a Warhorn. Play around with the Army of the Dead. If you play the Army of the Dead a lot, throw them courage 7 with a Warhorn, even the Harbinger of Evil. They're still wounding you on 6s, which is very good, If you've got elves wounding on 6s, and they've got the dead wounding on 6s, I guess it'd be 6s by 4s for your wood elves. But you two-hand with your two-handed weapons at fight 5, and now you're wounding on 5s by 3s. The enemy's wounding you on 6s. I think that's pretty much a wash most of the time. Anyway, so that's a pretty good spell, gets you through that. And then you've got Enchanted, but even with the high courage, if you don't have to take courage tests, if you need to charge something that causes terror, I'd almost always rather not have to worry about taking the courage tests, because you can always fluff them. Courage 5, courage 6 will fluff courage tests. If you don't buff the courage or anything, they're courage 4 if you've got Harbinger of Evil or Ancient Evil. Now you're starting to worry. Aura of Command with 2+, just cast it and you're good. You don't have to worry about it. He's got Enchanted Blades, which he can cast on himself, which is kind of weird and cool if you really got to cut through something. Again, cast on a 3+, not hard to do that. You got 3 might points lying around. You'd probably rather use your might for something else, but you got that just in case. And then he's got a 12-inch Immobilize, which, if you're fight 6 with an elven-made weapon and Lord of the West, and a banner, because you should always take banners with elves. You're probably going to win the fight anyway, but why not? If Azog is there in front of you, you're like, I'll just try to immobilize him with a 3+. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. I can cast it, and if it doesn't work, I go fight somebody else. But if it works, I get a free shot at Azog, which is pretty cool. Or name your favorite thing. The best thing are those big fight 7 monsters. He can strike, I think. He can, yes. Yep. Which is always great, and he's got defense as well. But, if you got a fight 7 thing, you just as soon immobilize it, I think, and take your chances. Even if you lose the fight, you're not getting hit. So it gives him more options to deal with those big things. He is significantly cheaper than Elrond plus Lindir, which is, I think, the last thing for me. I would think long and hard, and I'd have to search high and low, and I don't think I ever would, even if I searched high and low, find a reason for not giving him a weapon. In his base form, he is unarmed. Unarmed is terrible. Don't unarm him. There's no reason for you to have a fight 6 3-attack model that's unarmed. It's not.
Yeah. Granted, he does have Lord of the West, but that's not an excuse.
No. don't do it.
Just like a proper Iron Guard is 16 points, because he doesn't need the benefit from Feint, because he gets it automatically from the army bonus. You weapon swap that thing for an axe. Celeborn is always 135 points. He's never less than that. There is no, I've heard people say, well, thematically, if you're playing the scene where they're all in the Galadriel room, and you got him, you got Galadriel, and Haldir without the armor. No, that does not happen. That does not happen. He's 135 points. Probably 145 points, because I'm not convinced he needs the shield most of the time. Getting to defense 6 with just taking the heavy armor is fine. Getting to defense 7 is good. But, in my mind, if you need the 5 points for something else, he doesn't need the shield. He can get locked in fights. if he's locked in fights, he's going to win, right? Against most things. Anything that's really big that will beat him probably doesn't care if he has the shield anyway. So it's really just an option for him to defend by shielding, which removes the Elven Maid bonus, and there's just reasons.
Sure.
But
Yes.
he's at least 135 points.
Yeah. So I think it's good. I had him raised slightly above. I think it's the flexibility of the spells plus the cheapness. Elrond's got good spells. I felt like the Arm Command, Enchanted Blades, 12-inch Immobilize is a good mix of spells, and I ended up putting him slightly higher than Elrond, but obviously we as a collective whole did not agree, and that's fine. The last of the elves is Arwen to talk about, and Tiberius, you and Centaur both had her
Thranduil
at
as well.
10. Oh yes, well, we got to talk about Thranduil.
Yes, we do.
As well, we might as
Because
well.
I didn't put him on my list, and you guys did. You need to convince me that I was wrong.
put him the highest on my list. I have him at number 9, and then Rythbryt had him at number 10.
I did not feel good about having him at 10.
Sure, I didn't either, but looking at the other guys, I couldn't justify it only because Thranduil has 3 spells. They're 2 spells.
2 spells.
They're very good spells.
They're great.
He can only cast them once.
Yep.
And that's problematic. Now, the nice thing is, over past iterations of the game, they have clarified that this counts as being cast on a 6. Because in its first iteration, when it was first written, it just said it is automatically cast. And there was a whole bunch of confusion of if the spell is typically cast on 3s, does he cast it on a 3? Does he cast it on a 6? Do you get to roll and it's at least that? There was a whole lot of questions, and they've clarified it. It is cast on a 6, which makes it harder to resist. The one problem that I have with this, and the reason why I couldn't put him higher than Gildor or even Goldberry, because I don't think we've really even talked about Tom and Goldberry.
No, we're going to talk about them
Right.
next,
That's
but
what I thought.
you're sort of, after we do Arwen, but they're sort of in their own class.
Yeah. So the only reason why is it's one shot pops at 6, and I just cannot justify putting him higher than a bunch of the other actual casters.
So let me counter that a little bit, which is odd because I actually had him. He made my last spot, so it's weird for me to counter and offer a defense to somebody who had him ranked higher than I did. But the Nature's Wrath is the glamour spell, and that's the one that I sort of worry about auto cast on a 6, because you can still resist a spell that's caught on a 6. It's not hard to do. If you've got a spell, somebody resisting it with might, it's actually pretty easy to do if you have to do it. And with Thranduil, unlike Elrond or Arwen, who can cast these spells multiple times, you don't have to worry about Thranduil casting it again. You can burn your resources to make it go away, and you don't have to worry about it in the future. I actually think the better spell is the autocast Hour of Dismay, because nobody gets to resist that, and Hour of Dismay is notoriously difficult to cast. It's always a 5+.
It's
I don't
always a
think
5+.
anybody's got it on better than that. And that in the army that you were talking about earlier about armies that works in the armies that Thranduil is in, terror on the things that tend to accompany him is just the absolute worst thing, because he comes with elves who are fight 5. Within 3 inches of him, if you keep the army bonus, the elves are now fight 6. There is very little that is harder to fight than a fight 6 elf. The
Palace Guards
Guards,
become
who
fight
you would
6
keep.
with the banner.
Plus, they get reroll. They get +1 to wound, which is kind of
and they treat them as a banner, right?
The cavalry do. The cavalry.
I'm pretty sure the Palace Guards and the
I'm fairly sure it's just the cavalry.
Because
regardless,
that may make a difference for me.
Also Palace Guard. Oh, no, they receive the +1 to their fight value.
It's the army bonus.
To check the
is what
army
he's
bonus.
looking
I'm
at.
pretty sure the army bonus gives it both as long list of people treat as a banner.
Additionally, whilst they're within 3 inches of Thranduil, Palace Guard captains, Mirkwood Elf captains, Palace Guard, Mirkwood Cavalry, and Mirkwood Elves all gain +1 to their wound rolls when making strikes.
Right. The cavalry bonus, the banner bonus is in the cavalry.
It's just in the cavalry.
It's just on the
That is good to
Anyways, what I was saying was, if you've got a Palace Guard, right? Palace Guard is defense 6 because you'd always take them with the shield. Now they're fight 6 if they're within 3 inches of Thranduil. If they're within 3 inches of Thranduil getting the +1 at fight 6, now they cause terror as well. And a fight 6 elf at defense 6 is hard enough to fight on their own, especially, now if they're fighting, without spears, now you've got swords, now they've got Elven-made weapons, now they're winning ties at fight 6, which is just the height of lunacy.
It's ridiculous.
It's even harder now if they cause terror. They're harder to engage. And because Thranduil has crazy access to allies. It's a little bit harder now because of the recent changes. You got to have Heroes of Valor and stuff. But you've got Iron Hills Dwarfs, who are green allies, and you've got Survivors of Lake Town, who are dirt cheap. If all of those cost terror, now it's like multiplied, because not only do you have a front line of defense 7 dwarves who are now fight 5 or fight 6 because you've got elves behind them, but now everybody causes terror. It's just nuts. Now, you got bodyguard, you got high courage, maybe you get around that, but it's another thing that is just really annoying to deal with. And again, there's nothing you can do to stop it. So I think that's the better spell, I think, for 90% of the matches that you're going to be in. The last thing that I will say about Thranduil, fully decked out, he is a better combat model than all of these elves.
Yes.
Because he can get to the fight 7 with the dual swords, and he's got extra attacks potentially if you try to swarm him, so don't ever swarm him if you can avoid it. And he's got the elk, which is sort of the height of all absurdity when it comes to mounts. 12-inch move, fleet foot, strength 5 on the charge, at fight 7, multiple attacks.
And a quick note on the elk, and this is part of the reason why, going back to it, I think the Nature's Wrath is actually a more dangerous spell, in my personal opinion. If you've seen the size of the base for the elk,
it is a very large base.
The radius, as far as I know, is the widest Nature's Wrath in the entire game.
Well, that's true. With the exception of Radagast Slay,
right,
which would be larger.
Right.
But you line that thing up sideways.
Yeah, now Radagast Slay's Nature's Wrath is absurdly large.
That is just wrong.
So needless to say, as wonderful as Aura of Dismay is, 6 inches away, everybody causing terror is still roughly the same number of elves, whether you're on a 40mm base, a 25mm base, or a however big base.
Well,
because it's going to cover the same number of allied guys.
Right? I'm not sure about that.
6 inches around your stuff.
Well, that's assuming that you have him in the middle of the line. If he's behind the line, you're going to cover slightly more.
I suppose that's true. Yeah. But needless to say, you're going to hit an awful lot more people if the number of people in front of your base, plus 3 inches out from that, basically, are being knocked over. Right. So I'm just going to throw that out there as my one defense.
I am very happy to take the Nature's Wrath. The Nature's Wrath is awesome. Casting on a 6 is good. Even if they can resist it, it's hard. Even if you're draining resources from them, multiple will points and multiple might points to get the 6 to resist, that's great. Less might that they have to fight you later on. You're happy to be fight 7. If they run out of might and you run out of might, you're probably going to win if you're fight 7, because chances are whatever you're fighting is not fight 7. There's just not that much fight 7 in the game. But, so I don't disagree. It's a great spell. It is the one cast, the persistent benefit from Hour of Dismay. For me, I think, you have absolutely a better chance of it going off because it always goes off, and it lasts longer than just the one knockdown. You certainly have to be more strategic with how you deploy the Nature's Wrath. The Hour of Dismay, you just always pop it up. There's no reason not to pop it up at the beginning, and you're good to go. The last elf on the list is Arwen, and Tiberius, you want to say something about your girl?
60 points.
Your other girl.
Yeah, my other girl. 60 points, 2 reliable drops of Wrath of Bruinen. Don't have to channel them. Save the might point to boost the invariable one where you get a 3 high. You can put her on Osvaloth, who is very fast, fleet foot, reliable horse. Just a horse, otherwise. Not particularly defensible, but a good horse, nonetheless. And she's very cheap, easy to provide. 12 people can go with her. She's a nice drop in an army, and kind of like Thranduil, she's got 2 good turns of effectiveness, but that's 2 turns she can do damage, and it's very easy for her to get 60 points worth back from just those 2 casts, especially if she's targeting just warriors, and there are no heroes around to block it.
Yeah. She's a great option for a Rivendell spam list, not that Rivendell can spam, but, she's a hero fortitude. You can bring 12 troops with her. If you got Círdan and Arrestor and Gildor, as your 4 heroes, you're going to be low on might, but you're going to have an awful lot of room, and you're going to have pretty good coverage. You're certainly going to have a lot of magic and magic defense that you can get up, and she's the model is sort of an interesting one. The mounted model is not my favorite model, but she hits above her weight class, I think, and underrated fight 6 with an elven made weapon, which again. Yeah, if you get to endgame with her and everybody's out of might, fight 6 with an elven made weapon will win a lot of fights. if everybody is fighting with their base fight value.
And this is a bit of superstition, but there is a post that we did ages ago under the old rules.
Oh, yeah.
Where Arwen fought off a horde of people, and every round she was attacked, she got a 6. And when that happens, that fight 6 is all you need.
Yep. It's even better now because you got the elven-made weapons.
Now.
Yep.
It's even better now.
Worst case scenario, fight 6 against fight 6, you're going to get a 50-50 roll-off, and oftentimes it'll be better than that. Speaking of 50-50 roll-offs and combats, no, not really. The last 2 models that we had in our list is Tom, Bombadil, and Goldberry at 8 and 9, respectively. We had an interesting variation on the way that we ranked them. I had Tom ranked 7th. I did not have Goldberry ranked at all. Centaur had Goldberry ranked 6th. Did not have Tom ranked at all. Is that still current?
That is still current.
All right. And then Tiberius had Tom at number 5 and Goldberry at number 9. So my defense is quite simple. I did not want to give 2 spots to 2 models that do exactly the same thing.
But they
and
don't.
thought that Tom is the better model, so I put Tom on the list. So that's my reasoning. Tom is a great model. He's not as flexible as the other Infinite Will. I had him ranked at number 7, which is below the 6 models that get Infinite Will. I'm very comfortable with that. I think the Infinite Will models are a cut above. And, there you go. That's all I have to say about that.
Here's my defense of Goldberry before Tiberius goes full ham on why everybody should spend 300 points on fielding these 2 people.
And again, this is
Not
you
everybody.
chose, just to clarify,
Not
so
everybody.
your Centaur chose Goldberry, not Tom.
Not Tom, yes. And before anybody asks, or before you go madly to the comment section, I am well aware of the fact that you cannot run Goldberry in a list without Tom. Okay? I am well aware of this. She has a rule that says Goldberry may not be included in your force unless it also includes Tom Bombadil. However, the ranking system is for spellcasters. It is not for spellcasters plus anybody they have to have.
Unless,
okay?
of course, we are counting whether they can bring warriors in their warband or not.
Exactly. But that's may, not must. Okay. The important thing here is when you look at their casting, just so we can mention it, both of them have Refreshing Song within 3 inches on a 2+. An extremely useful spell that allows you to target a person, and they recover a single lost wound, as well as a single lost might, will, and fate point spent earlier in the battle.
Can you emphasize that and a little bit more?
Yes.
Let me correct what you said. This is a fantastic spell. This may be in a vacuum the best spell in the game.
This is the best spell in the whole game.
I don't know about the
Well,
best, but
it is.
It's a 3-inch range. That would be the
yes,
quibble, right?
That's the problem. Yeah.
The spell doesn't have a range. When it's listed in the rulebook on page 99, the spell doesn't have the range. The spell is the best.
Sure, right.
And
The application
This
of the
spell with a
spell
24-inch
does have a
cast
short
would be
range.
by
but
far the best spell in the
spell is
game.
the best.
All right, go ahead. Give your argument.
The second thing that Tom has is he does have Banish on a 3+ within 6 inches. My reasoning when I look at this is the major difference between the two, other than special rules and other stuff like that we could get into, okay, but I really don't feel like it's all that necessary right here and now as to what made my decision for me. There's a 20-point increase for the cost of Tom. I don't tend to see spirit models coming up enough to justify an extra spell, so in my mind they're basically the same caster, but one of them is 20 points cheaper. That's the difference that I see. And I know some people are going to say, well, but you can't make strikes if you're within range of Tom. That's great. And in the support category, we're going to talk about Tom. Okay? But that's not the category we're
Goldberry's
discussing
got the
today.
same rule,
yes,
right?
Yes, she does.
Yeah.
And I mean, yeah, as I said, like they're basically the same. And I don't feel like there's... so in my mind, when I'm looking at casters, one of them basically does the exact same thing as the other person for 20 points cheaper. That's why Goldberry makes my list. And like you, I just didn't feel like giving 2 spaces to Goldberry. To Tom and Goldberry.
Here's, I guess, my question, right? So it is 20 points cheaper, right? Goldberry is 20 points cheaper. Setting aside the fact that you have to, in fact, take Tom... Doesn't Tom has 5 more will points
5 more will.
and an extra spell, right? Is that not worth the 20 points?
I have rarely seen a game go more than 10 times me needing to cast. And especially when what I'm doing is I'm restoring wounds, might, will, and fate on a character.
Right, but
so,
I mean, that the will, correct me if I'm wrong, but don't you also lose the will each time that he's in combat?
Yep.
Doesn't he have basically
Yep.
good?
Yeah. He
good
basically
will
has the
of evil?
good version of Will of Evil.
So
Yeah.
while that's true, if you're casting a spell each turn and you're using his cancel a combat, that's actually more like 7 turns for Tom and 5 for Goldberry, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, again, I don't see us needing to use Refreshing Song all that often because most models don't have 2 or more wounds.
Well, I know you don't. I know you don't need it, but you would cast it, right? I mean, it's a free might point, also, right? So anytime you spend might,
sure, yeah. But again, I just don't think you'll need to use this too many times. Like that's the thing. And again, I don't run Tom or Goldberry very often, so there's that. But looking at it, yes, it looks good. I've never actually seen them run anywhere close to running out of might. So, well, running out of will.
So to be the voice that is different, I will just say I did a post on these two multi-purpose casters. Query it on our blog.
That's different. That's nothing you
should
haven't
read
said
that
today.
But see, for me, these are actually 2 very different casters. Tom is split focus. Okay, he has will that he's going to need to charge into Sauron or the Balrog models that maybe your army cannot tackle because you don't have the right hero core or you just don't want to spend the resource to deal with it. So you send Tom and you walk into the Balrog for several turns, right? He's also going to be split focus because if your opponent has spirit models, he needs to cast Banishment, right? I mean, it's a nice way to pop Shades and Barrow Wights and stuff like that. Barrow Wights are thematic for Tom to be dealing with. And then there's the Refreshing Song to give might points back to those heroes who only have 1 might point but have great things to use might with, like Gildor or Wholefoot Bracegirdle, who can march hobbits but only has 1 might point, right? You don't want those kinds of heroes to do what they do once, right? You want them to be able to do what they want to do lots of times. And so you Refreshing Song them. And if you have Tom needing to spend his will on all of those things, the split focus for him, yes, he's flexible enough to do it, but it's really hard. Goldberry has 2 things that Tom does not have. She doesn't have the split focus. Her will is spent on casting 1 spell, maybe charging people on the same turn. And unlike Tom's 3-inch auto-passing courage test boost, she has a 6-inch auto-passing courage test bubble. So she basically has an unchanneled aura of command on herself all the time. And that's really powerful in armies that don't have access to good courage-boosting things, like hobbits. I mean, yes, you can get the Mary's Horn and you can get the War Horn. That will give you a cumulative +2 because Mary's Horn is not a War Horn. But if you want to auto-pass courage test, Goldberry is a great way to do it. Can you do it with 300 points invested? Maybe. I don't know. But to me, they're 2 different people. That's why they deserve 2 different spots.
Okay.
So that's just me.
Fair.
Maybe you should read my post.
Fair enough. You know, they are the ultimate cheat codes. You're basically exchanging that for any army bonus that you have because they're always convenient allies,
Yep.
and so you're giving up any of your special bonuses. Some armies you care about that, other armies you don't. Use and deploy them carefully. They do tend to enrage opponents more so than anything else that you take because they cheat.
They do.
They change basic mechanics in the game, and that's fun to use with moderation.
And I'll be completely honest, I purchased the models primarily because my daughter was thumbing through the book and she saw this beautiful girl with a candle and she's like, I want to have it. So 90 minutes. So that's what we did.
So, welcome back. We are going to do something that's new, and I think will be kind of fun now. Spellcasters don't really function on their own, not in this game. They're almost always taken as part of a larger list because you need troops to bulk them out, and they work really well if you can buy them time to do the things that they do. And so we thought it would be fun to build some lists similar to what Tiberius has done in his Pocket Full of Power list, where these are not full lists for a full army, at least not if you pay at above 450 points. But these are warbands that you can pop into existing lists that would be fun to sort of augment another kind of list that you're thinking about running. So the criteria for this is we've each taken a hero from the rankings that we have. We're going to start with the top 3. We've got Gandalf the White in first, Círdan came in at second, and Saruman the White in third. And we've built a list around these heroes that can be up to 450 points. Kudos if you get something lower than that to slot in. And the idea would be, if you're interested in running these heroes or trying them out, these are our ideas about the kinds of warbands you might want to include these heroes in order to augment whatever else you're thinking about running. A couple of caveats, important ones. So first of all, we have rejiggered these lists in light of the recent FAQ designer notes about the way that allies work. I don't know that this will still be current when you hear this. This is the sort of change that I'm not sure this one is going to survive. And if it does, it's likely to be surviving in, this is a rule that maybe House ruled out the tournaments that you're dealing with. But we have accounted for the fact that under the new FAQs, you have to have at least a Hero of Valor anytime that you ally anything in. So all of these lists will include at least one Hero of Valor, and then flesh out warbands up to 450 points. So we're going to start with Gandalf the White. Gandalf the White, of course, is part of a Minas Tirith list. So Centaur, what have you built for us that takes into account Gandalf the White?
So I went back and forth on about 3 or 4 different lists for Gandalf the White. At first I started with kind of like a, almost like an Osgiliath Defense Force army that had like a solid front line to protect Gandalf, of just heavy shield wall warriors with spear support. It had some rangers in it. I then ended up kind of winnowing over to kind of like a Gandalf plus heavy Boromir, just walk into the middle of everybody and crush your foes sort of list. I landed on one that I've never run before, and I don't know I ever would, but it seems like a lot of fun. And it's Gandalf the White on Shadowfax, accompanied by 1 Knight of Minas Tirith with a banner and a shield, and 5 other Knights of Minas Tirith with shields. It is a fast attack army at 349 points. So if you're playing at 750, 500 points, this is less than half of your army, okay? In that sense, it is designed to be very much a pocket. But it did a lot of things that I really liked. First of all, it is extremely mobile. At 10 to 12 inches worth of movement, you can get anywhere you want to go. All of them can be protected by blinding light, so you're basically immune to archery, so you can make this a hit squad for taking out siege weapons, archer troops, people trying to hold an objective. It hits like a train, because everybody in the group has 2 to 3 attacks on the charge. Almost all of them are getting +1 to wound. If Gandalf wants to two-hand Glamdring, he could get +1 to wound. You get a reroll because of the banner. And in addition to that, I mean, you'll mess up enemy ranks with reliable spell defense. That's the big thing. The fact that Shadowfax has 2 will points, so if you really, really wanted to, if for whatever strange reason your staff gets broken, you somehow run out of will points, you technically still have 2 will points. And so because of that, it's a unique list that I never really would have thought about, but Gandalf can do this, and he can do it very well. Even if they're a lone wolf group that's off on their own, fighting somewhere else away from the rest of the battle line.
I'm a big fan of Knights of Minas Tirith. They are dirt cheap for what they do. They are very defensible. They are only the fight 3 that's sort of the thing that worries you, but you've got the banner, and of course, as a drop, there are a lot of civs that would really like to have heavy cavalry, just like there are a lot of civs that really would like to have a wizard. So this, for a lot of factions, this will meet 2 things that they just can't get on their own. So I like it in that respect. I do, it is a lot of horses. You've got, 6 horses altogether, I guess, plus
6
Gandalf,
plus Gandalf,
right?
so
So
7,
it's a decent-sized cavalry contingent as well. The thing that you worry about, we talked about this in the cast with cavalry armies, is you sort of worry about Panic Steed or Nature's Wrath getting knocked off your horse. You worry about that a lot less if you've got Gandalf around, especially if Gandalf can start casting Fortify Spirit on random horses throughout. It becomes very difficult to knock horses down if all of them are getting 2 free dice to resist.
Bonus that I really like about this list, in order to field this list, all you need to buy is Gandalf the White, which hurts, but you can buy Gandalf the White, and 1 box of Knights. That's literally all it takes to buy this. So if you're relatively new to the game and you just want to kind of tinker around for a low point tournament, this could be most of your army, and you'd actually do pretty well with it.
Yeah. Good. Very cool, very cool. So that's Gandalf the White, number 1. And of course, you can go Gandalf lots of different ways. You can take up to 15 guys, but for 350, that's a lot of good value. And again, like I said, there's a lot of civs that would really benefit from having that drop, so they can focus on something else. Second in our rankings was Círdan, so I put together a list for Círdan. I initially had a version of this list before the FAQs came out that was incredibly cheap, because Círdan is incredibly cheap, and it turns out you can take Círdan and 12 elves for less than 300 points, which is pretty good value. Basically, everything would, pretty much everything would appreciate having 12 fight 5 elves with defense 6. But alas, FAQs, now you have to have a hero of valor. So Rivendell has 3 valor or above. You could take Glorfindel if you could take Gil-galad if you wanted to. He's pretty good. You could take Elrond, of course. If you're sort of optimizing, you probably want Elrond in this spot. But I tend to think that the combination of Elrond and Círdan is just filthy. So I went for Glorfindel, who's pretty cool as well. Thematically, he's great. I did a write-up on Glorfindel recently when we were talking about the Rivendell list. I do think he's one of the more underrated combat heroes. He has basically everything that you would want in a combat hero. He's got fantastic mobility if you've mounted him on Asphaleth, which I have done. He's great defense, not just against regular attacks at the defense 7, but immunity to brutal power attacks if you take the Arm of Gondolin, which I have. He's always got Fortify Spirit up, so he's always getting 2 free dice to resist on top of his will points. So he's fantastic. The only thing you sort of want with him that he doesn't have is a +1 to wound, which you can get if you two-hand with your Elven Made Sword. And by the way, he's got an Elven Made Sword at fight 7, so he's not losing fights, even if somebody's striking against him. If he strikes back, that Elven Made weapon is just real clutch. So I've got Glorfindel leading this little detachment from Rivendell. He's got 2 High Elf Warriors with shields with him, 1 High Elf Warrior with a spear and a shield, 1 High Elf Warrior with a spear, a shield, and a banner, and 2 High Elf Warriors with elf bows and spears. I am a big proponent of sticking spears on your bows whenever you can, just because I like them to be able to do stuff. And even if you're allying this into a sort of a lower fight force, the ability to have fight 5 on a stick is really great. So that's the first warband. It's a total of 7 models altogether. And then I've got, in the second warband, I've got Círdan, of course, as our hero of fortitude. He's got 2 High Elf Warriors with shields, 2 High Elf Warriors with spears and shields, and 2 High Elf Warriors with elf bows and spears. So you end up with a mix of 12 warriors altogether, plus the 2 heroes, so 14 models. You've got 4 with shields, 4 with spears and shields. One of them has the banner, and then you got 4 with the bows and the spears. The bows and the spears, you sort of need to do some conversion work, but it's really great. That's a total of 403 points, which I think is pretty good. Considering what you're getting, you're not only getting a top-tier combat model, which even at a 450 point cap, which is really smaller, or 500 point cap, there's not a lot of models at 450 or 500 points that can deal with Glorfindel. And then you add Círdan and the magic defense as well, and you got a decent amount of troops bulking him up. If you were going to make the jump to 450, you wanted to max this out for some reason, the next thing I would add, I would strongly consider adding a couple of Rivendell Knights, just because they're really good. They're really tough to deal with. Fight 5 cavalry are hard to deal with. They can shoot, they can charge things. I would give them the shields, of course. And then you got 3 points left, which I would think strongly about putting spears on 3 of the other 4 warriors with shields, especially if you're going to ally into something else. Again, having the elves in the back rank where you can take advantage of their fight 5 is good. And then if if the enemy happens to kill whatever's in front, now they have to deal with fight 5 elves that are defense 6, who can start using their elven-made weapons to win ties and things like that. So that's what I went with for that. Any thoughts, comments?
I mean,
there with the obvious caveat that there's not a lot of variance in what elves can take. So
I was going to say, from a warrior perspective, you only have 2 profiles, right? You've got the knight, which is basically the high elf warrior on a horse, and you've got the high elf warrior, which is basically the knight not on a horse, right? So there's not a whole lot of difference there. I love Glorfindel. I have fought Glorfindel on many occasions. He is one tough cookie, and so he's really nice. But I mean, the nice thing about Rivendell too is, you have a lot of variety as regards to heroes for what you could bring. You know, if you need somebody who can kill some stuff to accompany Círdan, you could even go the Fortitude route. You've got a Rester. You've got, various other people that can help to fill the role. Heck, even the Captain's not bad.
Sure. No, if you're building a pure list, you certainly don't need to have Glorfindel, but for the allied list, I went with him because he was the cheapest, and I think he adds a lot. Obviously, though, Elrond would be a really strong play. If you can ally in the foresight points if for nothing else, that's really strong. And of course, how much Nature's Wrath and Renew are 2 additional spells that are really nice to have in addition to all the great stuff that Círdan's going to be able to do for your force.
Yeah. The perennial problem we've seen in our gaming group with Glorfindel is that he occasionally has problems killing things. If you're facing something that's defense 7 or 8, you're winning on 6s. Having Círdan in the same army to help you re-roll those failed is really powerful.
Right, with the enchanted blade.
And, yes, that helps with Elrond, it helps with Gil-galad as well, but for Glorfindel in particular, because he's so well-rounded, if you can't kill whatever you beat, that's a real big problem.
Yeah. All right, the last of our top 3 lists is a Saruman list that Tiberius has put together.
Well, so funny thing. So your list of top 3 was Gandalf the White, Círdan, and Saruman the White. My list of top 3 was Gandalf the White, Saruman the White, and Círdan. When you look at all of us together, because Saruman the White didn't appear in somebody's list, the number 3rd person overall is Radagast the Brown. I have this firm belief that if you bring Radagast with a bunch of eagles, you will regret not having enough might points. So the true list that you ally Radagast the Brown from apart from the lack of allies that Radagast Alliance has, is the White Council, who, as we've already talked about, can ally with everybody. And so my list has Radagast the Brown, Saruman the White, and Galadriel, Lady of Light. And they're conveniently 450 points. Now, for me personally, Saruman the White is an optional choice. You can choose to swap in Celeborn with all the toys. He saves you 30 points. But let's just talk about the 3 big casters here for a second. Galadriel provides the archery protection that Radagast does not have. Yeah. She also provides the courage debuff, which augments the Aura of Dismay that Radagast does have. So if you have her standing in front and Radagast right behind her, as soon as the battle lines meet, that second turn where people are trying to charge, your guys are all causing terror, and the enemy models are all courage -1 to the courage test they have to make. You add to that Saruman the White reaching out 18 inches ahead, keeping enemy monsters from even getting close to this fighting, Sorceress blasting into mounted heroes, right? Knocking warriors into mounted heroes to dismount them, and you just tear people up, and by the time they finally get to you, they are so broken and so messed up that they cannot deal with Galadriel and Radagast together. It is a sick and crazy list, but because Radagast is a hero of valor, you can take just him and Galadriel, Lady of Light, for 280 points and drop them into almost anything and get that terror courage debuff bonus with protection against archery, an anti-cavalry, anti-hero, anti-spirit model with her banishment. It's just crazy. I kind of want to try it sometime. So, I know I will not be liked, but I kind of want to try it.
So obviously the issue that you'd have with this sort of a pocket of power is that it's literally 2, maybe 3
2 models for 300, 450.
Right. So what kind of a list would this sort of a thing slot into? What sort of list would help to mitigate the fact that you've only got 2 models here?
Well, so my understanding is that with the new FAQs, your main force doesn't have to have a hero of valor or hero of legend, right?
So if you have one allied contingent, you have multiple allied contingents. So each contingent
so each one needs to have
a hero of valor.
Honestly, if you're running the White Council, the logical choice would be to drop it in, especially if you're taking 2 people from the White Council, the logical choice is to choose Rivendell. Rivendell, of course, you got to include one of those expensive heroes. Honestly, I'd go with Gil-galad. Just because he gives you the 18 and he's slightly cheaper when you give him everything than Elrond is. Elrond is probably the right choice. I often opt for him anyway. I traded my Gil-galad model off to somebody else a while back, so that probably tells me that I'm wrong, and I take it all back. But if you you could actually ally it in. You could actually, in a 700-point game, you could take the 280 points for the 2 people that I grabbed, throw it into the Círdan list that you did. You actually have a few more points left over from that 403 that you had base to throw in a few knights or whatever, a few more warriors, and you could have, I think it's probably overkill to have Radagast and Galadriel because you have Círdan already, but you could do Saruman and Galadriel for a nice tidy 300 points. Basically throw that in as is to what you have. You'd be a really tiny army, but no one would want to come close to dealing with it.
Right. Well, that's sort of what I worry about. I almost feel like that combination of 2 heroes almost benefits in some ways from going with more of a spam force like hobbits.
So you could do hobbits. Obviously, you could do Rohan infantry because they're going to lose their army bonus anyway, right? So depending on what you're doing, you could lose that too. Wouldn't matter.
So that's our top list for our top 3 heroes that we had ranked: Gandalf the White, Círdan, and then Radagast or Saruman in some order. We thought it'd be fun as well, since we know you all love list building, to give you some bonus lists. So we've also chosen one of the heroes that we particularly liked in our rankings. This could be from anywhere in the rankings or even didn't make the final rankings, but we thought we'd do that. So Centaur, surprise, surprise, has chosen to build us a list around Elrond. So apologies in advance. I'm sure this will be similar in some respects to the Círdan list, but what have you built us around Elrond?
Sure. So this is a list at 395 points. So there's definitely a lot of room for customization on this as well, if you want to. The list involves Elrond with heavy armor, 3 High Elf warriors with shields, 1 High Elf warrior with shield and banner, and 3 High Elf warriors with shields and spears. And then in Warband 2, we have Lindir with heavy armor, 2 High Elf warriors with shields, and 2 High Elf warriors with shields and spears. Now, there are 2 notable things you should notice about this list. First of all, this is what I refer to as a bunker caster force. This is a force that is designed to wade into the middle of a bunch of people, cast all day, kill all day long. Elrond's knocking people down, the elves can then engage them. He's getting, as long as he's within 6 inches of Lindir, he's getting that free will point to make sure he gets his cast. He's got his foresight points to make sure he gets to go first, so you can really winnow down an enemy very quickly. You'll also notice there are no ranged weapons in this force. I know that the army bonus for Rivendell involves getting rerolls of, failed to hits on your ranged attacks. I've intentionally not chosen any of those for 2 reasons. First, because this is a bunker caster force. They're designed to be a mobile force, running up to the enemy and moving to objectives and holding ground, so you're not going to be able to stand still, which is what the rule requires. Second, most of Rivendell's allies are convenient alliances, which means you're going to lose your army bonus. And so, if you wanted to ally this into a force, we've intentionally made it so that if you lose your army bonus, you don't actually lose anything. It's all the same. So it is a very different way of playing, but I feel like it can be a very useful way to play. And you still get your really heavy hitting sort of power out of it. And if you wanted to bulk it up to 450 points, flesh out a couple more warriors in order to improve the numbers that you have, and probably get Elrond a horse just so you can get that potential 4th attack on the charge.
I have built a list around Thranduil, who I said earlier in the podcast I think is the best of these elves when it comes to combat. So I felt I had to make do with that. I have taken him with basically all of the toys. He has the Circlet of Kings. He has the Twin Elven Blades. He's got heavy armor. He is on the Elk because, why not? If you've taken the trouble of painting the Elk as I have, you should run him on the Elk. I have not opted for the bow. I do sort of regret that. You could take it if you wanted to. It's another 5 points. It's 2+ to shoot, which means if you're moving the elk, which the elk gets to move 12 inches, so you can move 6 inches, you can shoot at 3+ after moving. It's a strength 3 elf bow. It's pretty good. If you want to do that, you could. With him, I have basically bulked up his warband about as much as I can. I ran into the issue that it turns out when you buy Mirkwood elves, they tend to be expensive. So I have taken 16 troops with him, so this is 17 models altogether with Thranduil. I have, of course, 7 palace guards with spears and shields. I don't know why you wouldn't take palace guards if you are also taking Thranduil. They go up to fight 6. take the Palace Guards. I've also taken a Palace Guard with a shield, a spear, and a banner. The Palace Guards have Bodyguard. Bodyguard on a banner is fantastic because it's never going to run anywhere. It doesn't matter if the army breaks. Doesn't matter if the enemy has Wood Elf Sentinels or Spectres. They are always going to stay where you are unless you actually blast them back with some sort of magic. Haha, surprise, surprise, what we've been talking about today. And then I have taken 6 Mirkwood Elves with Elf Bows and Elven Glaives, which makes them absurdly expensive, but you can take both the Elven Bows and the Elven Glaives now. And similar to what I was saying earlier with the Círdan list and the Rivendell list, Fight 5 or Fight 6 on Elves is fantastic. It's even better if you can put it on a stick. So if you're taking this as an allied contingent, now you can stick these guys behind whatever it is that you're taking, dwarves or hobbits or whatever it is. I mean, hobbits is kind of scary. You bulk out your hobbits and now you've got 14 elves with spear things that you can put behind them. The glaives, by the way, elven-made spears, so you get the benefit of elven-made weapons from spear supporting with Fight 5 behind your whatever it is. That will cause terror because you've got Thranduil and the Circlet of Kings and an auto-cast Hour of Dismay, so all sorts of nasty filthiness here. And then for the final 2 spots in the warband, I have taken 2 Mirkwood Cavalry with shields just because I believe you should always have at least some cavalry threat in your force. It's always nice to have. These guys happen to be Fight 5. They happen to be within banner range if they're within 6 inches of Thranduil. Thranduil is mounted, so why not have a couple guys with him who can be mounted as well? They get +1 to wound if they're within 3 inches of Thranduil. So this is this is a small but very hard-hitting hammer for whatever your anvil is. That also happens to cause terror if they are within 6 inches. And Terror Cavalry, that is Fight 5 and Defense 6, and can move 10 inches and gets +1 to wound, and counts within a 6-inch banner, is just great. Why would you not take a couple of these things? Believe it or not, that comes out to 434 points, which is a lot of points, but not as much as I feel it should be. I feel like you're getting more than 434 points worth of value, which means you can take 300 points worth of hobbits with these guys. I guess you give up your army bonus so you don't get the +1 to wound, but you still get the terror, you still get the Fight 5 or Fight 6 on a stick. You still got 300 points worth of hobbits you could take. You know, pretty good. You still got elf bows. I like it. I think this is great. I think this is the best that Rivendell can offer. Yeah, not Rivendell, that Mirkwood can offer in a Thranduil list. But I was sad that I could not get Tauriel into this list. That's all I will say.
I'm going to just say that as I was driving in tonight, I was like, okay, I was reminiscing about Thranduil's halls, and it occurred to me how absurdly wrong a 2-point Elven Glaive is, because you can use it as a spear, or a 2-handed weapon, or a shield,
right,
for defense by shielding, not for the bonus defense.
Or a one-handed weapon.
Or a one-handed weapon, yep. And they're all Elven made, so no matter how you're using it, for 2 points, you have incredible flexibility with your infantry. And to put that on a model that begins at, 9 points or something like that?
Yeah, they are your basic, they cost the same as a high elf, right?
They're not that much, they're like 13 points a model.
They're 13 with the full kit, right?
They're not that much more expensive than any of the other elves that you're going to see in any of the other factions. And yet they are so much better.
Yeah. These are good fun, by the way. If you've never played with elves, with the elf bows and the elven glaives, they are good fun to play with.
Only defense 5, though.
They are only defense 5, but you can shield at Fight 5, and again, with Thranduil on the list, they cause terror.
Oh, yeah.
And there are a lot of armies that will have a lot of trouble getting to a terror-causing elf that then can now shield with an elven-made weapon. That's kind of absurd at Fight 5. There are a lot of heroes that will have trouble dealing with a Fight 5 troop that can shield with an elven-made weapon, so... Anyway, that's the list. I think it's really great. I think it wins the Best List of the Day award.
Sure, why not?
Pretty good. That's pretty good.
But as we talk about sick and disgusting...
Yes, I know.
We have my list, which, obviously, as the only person who put both Tom and Goldberry on the list and spent a wee bit of time defending them, both in print and in Word now, I felt like I had to write up a list that had both of them in it. 300 points sunk into 2 heroes obviously is going to be costly for most armies. But there's a very thematic choice that is not hurt and actually is very greatly helped by spending 300 points on these 2 heroes. And I call this list the Borders of Buckland list. And so we have Tom and Goldberry, both with all the toys that they cannot take, but the flowers and the candle. And allied in with them is, of course, the defender of Buckland himself, the indomitable Meriadoc Brandybuck, on a pony with a shield, because why not? You should have the extra mobility. And 15 Batlin Brandybucks. Okay? And these are, of course, as Centaur will be the first to say, what gear do they have?
Oh, axes.
Axes! They have axes! At 5 points a model, you have potential for Strength 3 or Strength 4 hobbits, depending on whether you Piercing Strike. The Piercing Strike is, of course, not going to hurt you, because you start off at Defense 3, and, well, yes, being wounded on 3s is worse than being wounded on 4s, but it's not that much worse than being wounded on 4s. You have a whopping 18 models for... I don't have the number on me because I left it behind, but it is something like 380 points. Yeah. Okay? Now, we started with 300 with the 2 casters, and we have like 380 points spent on just these models. It might be drifting closer to 400.
Yeah, it's around 4. Yeah,
but it's something like that. If you just deck out the whole rest of the army, because of course this comes from 2 different lists, Wanderers in the Wild and the Shire. If you just go with the rest of the Shire, you can throw in guys like Wholefoot Bracegirdle for Heroic March. You can throw in, of course, Frodo for a banner. Treat it as a banner, an important note. And, max out their warbands. You put archers in there. You put, sheriffs in there, obviously, if you bring Wholefoot. And you can get a nice, tidy 40, mid-40s, low 50s model count with 2 heroes who can go over to the heroes that you're using to march or whatever your army and say, yes, have that might point back. You'll need it, son. Or, hey, let me go deal with Sauron for you, right? Just hold my beer, right? And it's a nice, tidy little group. It's very expensive to collect, obviously. Shire is notoriously expensive to buy. But they are a lot of fun to use, and I think if you're going to find an army that can benefit from Tom and Goldberry the most, it's really the army that needs might or fate back more than others, and no list needs might and fate points back more than Shire. Their heroes are so vulnerable. Their heroes have so little might to begin with. Yes, you can get a lot of them, but they really need that boost, and Tom and Goldberry can give it to them.
So I have a fun sort of additional ad that you could have. It occurs to me with the new changes to the Kings that if you wanted to, you could also add to this group, this sort of thematic group that you have, you could add a King of Men from the Minas Tirith list, because you can't include him in any list that has any named Gondor models, but you could use him as a stand-in for one of those, regents that Aragorn has up in the rebuilt Kingdom of Arnor, and bring some Minas Tirith warriors to go with them.
And knights.
And knights as well, to be like a scout force from one of the Arnor forts. Maybe he's rebuilding Fornost up in the north, and you've got a little garrison that's there. And a lot of fun sort of thematic stuff that you could do with this, because everything that you built is so cheap. I mean, you could probably have another warband of hobbits on top of that. I mean, who's the one that helps the militia do the +1s to wounds?
So that's Wholefoot Bracegirdle,
right,
who makes the sheriffs not get the penalty for their two-hander.
But then you have Farmer Cotton, who gives an extra reroll of 1s and also a +1 when they're within range of him, and he's, only 35 points. So,
right. And
he's a fortitude guy, so you can fit 12 guys under him.
Lots of different ways you go for this. What Tom and Goldberry, beyond the adding the might points back and the will or the whatever you're going to do with that, what else would they be doing in this list, other than obviously you can mitigate two significant targets and you can't do anything about it?
Shire is notoriously bad for not being able to deal with big heroes, right? Sauron and the Balrog and Gil-galad, they're going to walk all over most Shire lists. You have two heroes, though, that you can just if all they do the entire game is walk into that hero and keep him from winning any fights, not dealing any damage, then you've won, right? And if you're bringing someone like Sauron or the Balrog, it's unlikely that they have a second hero, unless they got like a Troll Chieftain or something like that, that's going to provide that supporting damage. And so having two people to just nerf and shut down whatever you're dealing with is massive. It's absolutely massive. And it frees up then your Shire heroes, who are not great, but they're not horrible, to just focus on killing warriors or generic captains who can't strike. I mean, Merry can strike, right? And so you're getting that in there. He can challenge as well. If you find a weak Valor hero or, a weak Legend hero that you want to get locked in with, you want to get locked in with Galadriel or something like that, or Radagast, they have the tools to do it, but Tom and Goldberry free up that other problem of, what's going on there. The other thing, too, is that while Shire doesn't have that much of a problem with courage if you bring a normal Warhorn, again, like I said before, Tom and Goldberry have auto-passing courage test bubbles around them. So if you're facing an army of the dead, you're facing Black Numenorians backed by Ringwraiths, you can charge whoever you want with all the hobbits. And, of course, this list classifies, in the Green Dragon terms, as a will no one think of the children list, because we have at least one warband of hobbits. So, there's that, too. Which is a gimmick reason to do it, but yet another reason to do it. So, there you go.
there you go. Well, that was fun. Maybe a little bit too fun. Where are we?
We're at around 2 hours now.
Ooh, okay. I think we've made an executive decision because it's late and we're tired and we have to work to bump the evil models for next time, because there's no way that we're going to cover all of the evil models in 2 minutes.
And if you thought we disagreed about the good models, you need to tune in next time to the evil models, because it's gonna be one very interesting discussion.
Yes. Hot take: Fury sucks. Totally overrated.
Totally.
That's not true.
Well, if you enjoyed what you listened to, or if you've got comments for us, the things that we can do to improve, do let us know. Check us out on Facebook with TMAT SBG. On the blog, Tell Me a Tale, great or small.blogspot.com. We got to do something about that. And on YouTube as well, here, where you're hearing this video. We are also over on SoundCloud for now. We'll see if that persists. We appreciate everybody. The feedback on the first episode was great, so do let us know if there's things you disagree on, things you want us to do differently. We appreciate that.
And you guys know how to use the interwebs, so, like, comment, subscribe. Definitely be sure to comment and tell us a tale, great or small.
Yes, thank you for that. That wonderful branding. Before we leave, Tiberius wants to share a random word of wisdom for you to take into your games, one of the tips that we've curated over the week, and we have no idea what it's going to be, so go ahead. Just see us out, Tiberius.
This is Rythbryt's rule number 8. Take banners. Take banners always. No, duh.
I 100% endorse that.
I said those things before he did, but yes, I'm glad it finally made it into the greater consciousness, and it exists.
So do it, so we can stop telling you to do it, please. All right, see us out.
Ciao.